Hello teacups, what's brewing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you for being patient. I know that a lot has been going on in Chantalverse at the moment, and I was pretty busy the last few days. I actually took my kids on a field trip yesterday, so pretty exhausting. I crashed out about an hour after I got home and woke up at 4 o'clock this morning, so didn't cover anything. I am a little bit behind with Chantal. Her last two dinner lives I haven't watched, and I understand she deleted one. I haven't caught up with it. But there's been a few different topics going on in the verse at the moment, and so we're just going to touch upon those. One of the big topics that's been discussed this week has, of course, been her cats. I haven't spoken much on it up until this point. Basically, up until now, I've been one of the people that have believed the cats would be better off elsewhere. And I know it's a horrible thing for her to do, to just abandon her pets after X amount of years because she wants to essentially move on from her life and start fresh somewhere new, and therefore that includes any link she might have to her old life. But we've seen this coming. She's seen her cats as an inconvenience since basically Nada was on the scene. And the narrative around BBJ and the fragility of BBJ has been building for a while. She went from having a go at her subscribers for saying that she needed to go to the vet because she was as healthy as a cat half her age, to being frail and near death's door. I essentially, for all it's a terrible thing to do, I don't mind Sam going to a new home. I think he'll be better off there and better cared for there. So I haven't gotten massively angry about it, but the BBJ stuff does irritate me quite a lot. I do think the way she's changed her story on this for her own benefit is really quite cruel, because it's entirely possible, and this is her argument, that old cats sometimes need medical care and sometimes might suffer, and therefore better she not suffer, better she get put down. Now you can make a judgment call on this, but I think it's very different to have BBJ suffering, be taken to a vet and be told independently, no, there's no treating this, it may be her time, to actively seeking out a vet to tell you it's okay to do that. And I definitely think Chantal is the latter rather than the former. Actively shopping diagnoses for your cat so you don't have to feel as guilty about putting her down, while having a set timeline that you brought forward. So clearly no other plan for BBJ at all, intending that this be the final point, I think is a very different situation than, okay, your cat's suffering, it's her time. And I find it a lot more callous than what she's done with Sam. Now, it's funny, but not really in a ha-ha way. A few live streams ago, because there's been quite a few since, but I was in Pulpy's chat and we were actually discussing this, and what I thought Chantal would do was, I thought she would claim that she had rehomed BBJ, and then, quite a shock, a week later, well, the new owner was concerned and they took her to the vet, and the vet said, oh no, it's time. And she would just lie about it. But no, she's actually on camera been like, yeah, I think it might be time. I do not think that's the right call. I don't think she has that many other options at this point, because she's purposely put herself in a position where she doesn't have any. But there are a number of people that have reached out and said they'll take her. And so it's Chantal's own pride preventing BBJ getting a new home at the moment, not anything that BBJ has or doesn't have. And I'm aware that rehousing elderly pets is much harder than housing kittens or housing other pets, but she had options she chose not to pursue because she thought she'd just take her to be euthanized. You know, of all the things Chantal has done on this channel, I didn't think it would be the pets that would finish it off, but people have really strong feelings about it. And I think Chantal has underestimated her audience in this regard hugely. Now, one thing that did make me think she wasn't serious in rehoming BBJ at all is that she said she was going to wait till after payday to take her to the vet. Now, I don't know how much a vet visit costs in Ontario. I should have looked it up when I looked this up, but euthanizing a cat costs about $150. So apparently she's waiting on some money for that. If she doesn't get the okay from the vet, I don't know if the vet would do it if there was nothing wrong with the animal, or if they would do it on request. I actually had a neighbour, this was awful. I had a neighbour who had two beautiful cats, And when she left Saudi, she had them both euthanized because she couldn't afford to take them to the UK. And she said she didn't trust any person she gave them to not to abandon them when she left. And so she wouldn't try and rehome them. And she ended up euthanizing them, and it was pretty terrible. But the vet did that on request. She kept it very hush-hush because apparently it's not a done thing in Saudi Arabia. So I don't know the views on it in other countries. In that case, the vet would do it on request. I don't know what the laws or the regulations are in Canada, if a pet has to be ill or if it can be for other circumstances. Ultimately, I think if Chantal gets what she wants, she doesn't care. And she's shown that with the pets, and she's shown that with Pete's as well, actually. She has very much written off Pete's. Because as long as she doesn't have to feel guilty about it, she'll just ignore it and be like, oh, well, that's life. Things happen for a reason. And we've talked before about my feelings about Pete's and whether he should be relying on Foodie or not. But her response to someone said, like, Pete's was talking as if he wanted to unalive himself, and she completely changed it into being basically about, yes, but what about me? My mental health has been terrible. And just didn't really engage other than like, oh, well, I hope he doesn't, but didn't show any particular care for her friend of over 20 years. So hopefully Pete's has support elsewhere because he's certainly not getting it from her. He has to be out, I'm guessing, at the end of the month. I don't know when their contract started, but she went to visit her family. She's going to be gone pretty soon. His days are numbered in the villa. There's been a fair amount of talk about money and kind of her debts and the fact that her bankruptcy got adjourned rather than dismissed. So somebody at some point asked, could she put the money into one of Salah's accounts in Salah's name, for example, rather than in hers to hide the fact that she's receiving it. And I was actually looking through, I've got it up here right now, how you receive payments for YouTube. And theoretically, she, I suppose, could have his account, but I don't think it would work. There's some different methods of payment you can get. For example, she could receive a payment by check, but paying it in might be an issue. Like, you can have people added to your account, but the bank account that you're sending it to should be addressed in the same country as your YouTube payment is issued, which is why I receive YouTube payments into my UK account, even though I'm here and I'm in I was about to say Saudi Arabia, I'm in Oman. So I think she would have an issue with the fact that Salah does not have a Canadian bank account. I think that might cause some issues. So she could certainly send him the money if she wanted to, but I think it would have to hit her account first because he doesn't have a Canadian-based banking system. The options for checks seem to be mostly South American, and it does say that the checks are for deposit only. They can't be cashed. So she can't send him a check to Kuwait and have him cash it, for example. She talked a little bit more in another couple of her lives. Sorry, I've got notes from different days, so I'm just trying to remember what I wrote and why I wrote it. At one point she was complaining. Oh, and speaking of complaining, she was snapping at Salah about the interview Morad did, and we are going to talk about the interview. Of course, we're going to talk about the interview in a moment, but I've just saved it for last because it's the longest. But she was very snappy at Salah and her thoughts on everything. And I was just thinking at the time she needs to be really careful because when she used to play out every relationship drama she had online, she was far less reliant on the man. But now she wants to literally crash and burn all her things in Canada that she can and go to Kuwait. Even if she's earning her own money, she's a lot more reliant on Salah, and he is much less likely to take it. Now, clearly he's got his own plans, and frankly, he's accepted a lot more than I would expect him to at this point, which to me just proves how little he cares. But I guess he has an end game, whatever that end game is, and as long as he's moving towards it, he doesn't care about the interim. But she should be very careful playing the usual kinds of humiliation games she plays online because she wants the attention, because she's angry, because she's triggered, because you can't unsay certain things even if you delete them. And she wants to be careful if she's going to Kuwait and she's reliant on him being there, which she is very reliant on him in Kuwait, not to push too many of those buttons, because he's not going to take it for as long as someone like Nader did, because he's not getting as much benefit from it. He's got the promise of benefit in the future, but even that is limited given her finances, given her lack of ability to bring him to Canada right now. And they claim they don't care about that, but with all the other checks and balances in terms of her behavior online and the impact it can have, how long is that actually going to last? But control has never been her strong suit, so God knows where we will end up in the future. Okay, so let's talk about Morad and the interview he gave on, whose channel was it? Skinny Queen? I think it was Skinny Queen. I didn't actually use Skinny Queen's video for this because Mo Translate actually put up a much more easily accessible video, I found, because she cut out the interview and then she translated everything into subtitles and things. So I just found it easier to pick through as I was trying to do this. So Morad is a character we have heard of before. I did question if he was one of the witnesses in the marriage, and surprise he was. So there we go, even though Chantal was kind of angry and no, you don't think we got other friends? And like, no, I don't think. I think you are very short on friends. But he's Salah and Allah's friend, and he says basically he's Switzerland, he's neutral. If he feels something wrong has been done, he will support that friend. But as it is, he's kind of in the middle. He doesn't want to talk bad about either of them. That's the premise of this interview. He would be with whoever was right, but he doesn't want to trash talk either of them. So he talks a bit about the marriage they claim to have, and he says they are married, but they're married in, is it called a Mishya marriage? I'll put up the screenshot of the subtitles of what was said. Now, I was looking up to see if there's any difference between that and the other forms of temporary marriage that we've spoken on before, the mutter marriage, things like that. It doesn't appear so. The difference seems to be where the practice originated, but it's for the sake of what we're discussing and our purposes. You've got the option of some kind of temporary marriage, which the Mishya is counted as part of, and then regular marriage, which is ongoing, shall we say. Now, in temporary marriages, the husband and wife give up certain legal responsibilities that you would have in a regular marriage, and in a regular one, you're connected in law, in the courts, and in the eyes of God. Whereas the temporary one is basically, hey, we would like to have sex without all the problems. Could we please do that? And so you give up those rights so it can just be done quickly. It's more a personal agreement. There is a contract in this one, which is, I think, what Foodie has been talking about, but it's not recognized by the court as being a full traditional marriage, which is what they're trying to fix right now. I did do a short on this, but when I did my short, I had only done a quick Google. I've done a slightly longer Google now. I'm sure I don't have every piece of information, but this is how I understand it at the moment. So Foodie came in, claimed to be married, which I suppose technically this is recognized by Sunni Muslims, but not by other types of Muslims. But it does meet the requirement in Islam for a marriage in terms of having the witnesses, having the contract, agreeing to do it. So technically, in the eyes of Islam, they're married. In the eyes of God and society, they can be together without breaking the laws on morality, which is really the issue they were facing in terms of living together. If they weren't married, they could be arrested for it. Now, something on the timeline that confuses me a little is we got the video of them getting married a full on, 2 months after she got there. And she claimed that's when they did. And then Morad behind the camera was going, congratulations, congratulations, like it had happened that day. And we've had it confirmed that they haven't converted the marriage yet, which I'll talk about in a minute. So I'm not sure what the congratulations were for, unless the contract had only just been issued for this temporary marriage, in which case she still would have been married legally. So something in the timeline still doesn't match. We had talked about temporary marriages before, but because they don't have the recognition in the court in a way that would allow her to take him to Canada or what have you, I had discounted it, but it was the only one that had fit the timeline. If they just agreed and then kind of it was a personal agreement between them. So that appears to be what had happened, and that's why they were wearing rings a day after she got there. But then it doesn't gel with the video she put out disproving us haters. Really, she shoots herself in the foot when she does these things because her timeline still doesn't match. But anyway, discounting that, if we say, okay, well, Foodie likes to throw things in people's faces and shoot herself in the foot, and that's a separate issue, and we just take her as being married enough to not get arrested from the start of her trip, okay? So now she's trying to get it converted. Here's my confusion then, because Morad was not forthcoming with the details. He said there's a loophole, there's a way, but he can't tell us what it is, which sounds dodgy AF and was the problem that Chantal came up with when she was being questioned, when she was like, oh, there are ways around it. And I was like, by law, there are no ways around it. We have talked at length on this channel the requirements for a full legally recognised in court marriage, and she still doesn't meet those requirements. He is asked outright during this interview, well, how can that happen on a tourist visa? And he's like, it just can. Can't tell you more. I don't believe it. Going by the Kuwaiti government site that we looked at when I was pulling up all my receipts, she would still need a Kuwaiti residence permit. She would still need a civil ID, which he has, but she doesn't. Now, we know from Chantal talking herself that she's planning to go back for 3 months and then she's planning to border hop to do visa runs, which, as I said, will go on for a little bit, but at some point she's going to be questioned by the border saying, hey, why are you doing this? If you're going to stay here on a more permanent basis, which is what she's planning on doing, then you need to have a different visa to this. A visitor visa can't be abused in this way. Now, I was looking to see if there was an actual hard limit on how many tourist visas can be issued in a year. I can't see that formally written anywhere. I know some people have said you can't have more than 2, so it can't be more than 6 months. I guess because in terms of tax statuses and things like that, half the year tends to be when things flip. I know if she stays more than 6 months, then she is liable to lose services in Canada. She'll still be a citizen, but she'll be a non-resident, and it tends to automatically shift after 6 months. But I don't know if in Kuwait they have a set date or if it's just a case of, hey, you seem to be doing this too much, and then you just can't come in. And could you imagine the disaster if that happened for her? She went out for 3 days, having come in a couple of times on a tourist visa, and then just got stopped and turned away. Where would she go? Her mom's, I suppose. But the point is, anyway, that she's still planning on going back on a tourist visa. The fact that she's brought her visit up just tells me that. She did make mention at one point of getting her paper, proving she hadn't been married before. So that's clearly going towards this case to try and get this contract converted, because she would need that if she wanted to get married. But I don't see how they get around the tourist visa issue. I just don't see it. We'll find out, I suppose, or won't, depending on how well she lies. It all comes out eventually, but I don't see her being able to do that, even under these circumstances, because if you're converting something to be legally recognised by the court, you're going to have to meet the requirements. And she doesn't meet them, and that's where this stops. She doesn't meet them, and she's got no intention of changing the visa that she's coming in on, because if she had, and if she could even, she hasn't done the work to change that visa. Now, Morad did talk more about his company. He said she is not invested in it, she is not connected to it, so any ID through a work contract with him is a non-starter. So that option is now off the table, and that she has no other. There's nowhere else she could go work. There's nowhere else she could prove the education level she would need to go and work and be approved to be brought in on a work visa. And she's not doing the work to do it because she's leaving after a couple of weeks anyway. So in terms of Foodie status, it's not changing at any point now, and we will see what she claims the court says later. There was a little bit of talk about, okay, what about Salah going to Canada? And does Salah know that Foodie can't take him to Canada because of her bankruptcies and her situation there? And it seems that Salah's state of mind right now is that they will finalize things in Kuwait for 1 to 2 years, and then he plans to move to Canada, but he wasn't 100% sure on it. Morad wasn't on the details. I don't think anyone in this situation, Salah and Foodie combined, or included, I should say, could know past 1 or 2 years at this point, because it really does depend on if she can sponsor him. Now, can he get to Canada another way? Morad seems to think so. He could be a tourist if he were permitted to get the visa with his Syrian passport. Now, this was a talking point because there was some talk about his Kuwaiti residency, and the lady, I can't remember her name, sorry, the lady that was interviewing him did have a little bit of confusion what he meant between residency card and visa. In Arabic, Morad used the word igama. So it's the same kind of igama that I had in Saudi that I have in Oman. And I don't think Morad was lying here, but I do think he's misunderstood what can be done with the igama. So Morad was saying that they plan to expand the business into the UAE and Saudi Arabia, which I think is a separate point to the Canada plan, but connected with it in the sense of, he was saying, well, he can take a business visa. And I think when he was mentioning the UAE and Saudi as their expansion plans, he was talking more about why it might be 1 to 2 years, and the fact that if Salah is involved in his business, and that appears to be Salah's only job, then essentially he can work from anywhere the same way Chantal can work from anywhere. But he claimed that he could go on what would be a Canadian business visit visa, and say, no, I work for this business. So I looked up the business visit visa. I'll link these things down below. Basically, when you have an igama within the Middle East, you can travel on it. So when I was in Saudi Arabia, if I wanted to drive over to Bahrain, I could use my igama as ID instead of taking my passport. Now, I have a British passport. It's a strong passport. There's no reason for me not to travel on it. But if I had a much weaker passport, the way the Syrian passport is, maybe an igama is a good choice for that. So if you enter through certain ports, like if I'd gone through the causeway, so it's a road port, a roadway into it, then I could use my igama if entering by road. So within like the GCC and the Middle East, there are definitely rights to travel on the igama. However, those rights don't extend usually to most places you visit by plane, certainly not usually to the West. You would need a passport for that. I feel like I checked at some point, and perhaps he can get a tourist visa to Canada, but he'd have to prove a certain amount of money, which he'd have to do either way. But Salah was basically saying he could go on a business visit visa, which would mean in Canada, if you go on a business visa, there's 2 types. There's business person and there's business visitor. If you're a visitor, you're essentially there for about the same amount of time as a tourist visa. I think it has to be no more than 6 months, whereas a tourist visa might only be 3, but don't quote me on that. I'll link the page and it's got the information. I'm just doing it from memory right now. You can go essentially looking for business opportunity, but you can't engage in, economically speaking, in business while you're there. You can't be in the workforce. If you're in the workforce, you need a business person's visa, so you can work locally. So it's a little bit different, but you can essentially, like, you can do meetings, you can look for business opportunities, you can look at potential employment or expansion or whatever on this business visit visa. And the requirements, I couldn't find out how much money he would need to prove. You have to prove you have money to sustain yourself, and you have to prove that you have money to send yourself back. So I'm guessing you'd have to have a return flight. Now, Morad did mention a few different numbers, but I didn't see mention of those here, so we might be confusing the visas. I did see for a tourist visa, they consider proof of funds to be 2,000 Canadian per 30 days. So if he was staying 90 days, he would need 6,000 Canadian. and proof of trip back. Which, if it's at all possible for him to get a tourist visa with a Syrian passport, I think he should probably just go for and not try and include the business stuff in this. But it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. But as I say, it's a little bit complicated, but I don't think the Kuwaiti residency card has the power outside of the Middle East that Morad thinks it does. That was really the main thing I wanted to talk about with the interview. There were a few other things. Morad mentioned that Chantal should be having lessons basically on how to be a Muslim every 1 to 2 weeks, which I'm pretty sure she's not having. He also weighed in on the argument between them. At first, it seemed like he didn't realise the amount and the depth of the stuff that Chantal had said about Allah's wife, because it seemed to be initially that they were just talking about Chantal either saying that they were helping her cook or not. It was a question about the word like maid and whether they were basically being directed by her. But he didn't consider that big a deal. He was like, why not leave it? But then as the interview progressed, it seemed like he had a bit more knowledge, but he was very reluctant to weigh in on it. Basically, while not attacking either party, he says Allah started it by talking shit about Chantal on the phone or what have you, just talking crap about her in general, and that could have been really serious for him, but because of how diabolically Foodie responded, it kind of saved him, because then she said so much they couldn't possibly charge him for the small amount he did, but basically Morad thinks they should both stop. Neither of them seem particularly trustworthy at this point. Obviously, Morad's in business with Salah. He's got a vested interest in nothing bad happening to either of them. And the longer Allah goes, the more this whole thing looks like a cash grab. He did put up a notice saying, hey, I'm going to go online, I'm going to explain the temporary marriages, and here's my Cash App, which doesn't actually work in Kuwait, but who knows what he's doing. But it seems more like a grab for audience. Now, we did talk about that when he first came on the scene. He wanted 1,000 subscribers. And it was like, but then at the same time, his information seemed good and we were interested. So, all right, he's grabbing for subscribers, whatever. But it seems more overt now. And as it goes on and he doesn't seem to be pursuing the case, it looks more like he's drumming up drama for the sake of drumming up drama and getting the YouTube cash. So if he can do it, then take your coin. But to be honest, both of them seem pretty skeevy. He did confirm that the video Allah took that had the picture of them was secretly taken, which is kind of gross, but then also tried to defend himself doing the same thing in his own defense, which I was like, And so, I don't know, a little bit sus on both sides. No one's motives are completely clean here. In terms of Chantal's behaviour, he seems more dismissive of it, and he doesn't want to start trouble with anyone. He says, in the West, her behaviour is more common in things like living with Pete's and that kind of thing, and it's changing. And he was giving her a lot more credit for wanting to change. But at the same time, when people were saying, well, but she's not, here are the things she's still actively doing, he basically was just like, well, I can't talk on that. However, he did say, in terms of Chantal, what was the phrase? A fire will never happen without gas. And they were trying to explain to him, yes, but if you're triggered by everything all the time, at what point does the problem become you? And he gave a non-answer for it. So that was that, really. I think that's about all I have to say on it, to be completely honest. I know a lot's happened and I'm behind. I still haven't watched the other ones, but I didn't want to go any longer because I've been quite busy. I knew by the time I got to this, it would just be out of date, but a few people had asked, particularly because of the visa talk and the marriage talk, and I've been so vocal about it, kind of what my take was, and that's where I am with it right now. I understand a bit better how she got where she got, but I still don't think it will work. And I do, sorry, before I go, I don't understand, other than the fact, I suppose, that Chantal is hardwired to lie at all times. If this was legit, and if it was a case of, well, this is a temporary marriage and this is the easiest way to do this because all this paperwork is really difficult, why not just say that at the beginning? Because I could understand that. I know how difficult the paperwork is. I'm guessing because she just lies because she lies, but also because she doesn't care what the status is until it affects her, until someone shows up on her door to arrest her. So she wanted this by any ways and means. And if she's told, yeah, no, this is fine, then yeah, no, this is fine. And I don't think she particularly looked into it very hard because she was getting what she wanted. And it wasn't really until we started questioning her that she was like, oh, shit. So I guess that's the answer, but she lies for the sake of lying. She really does. And it would have been easier just to be like, yeah, it's really complicated. This is why we're not getting arrested right now, but we're looking into future plans for this. But she didn't. And here we are. Okay, everybody, thank you very much. And I suppose I will see you next time. Bye-bye.